Hey, I'm Steve Wright. I'm the General Manager here at Chelan PUD, and we have recently released our draft strategic plan for 2020 to 2024, and I want to tell you a little bit about it and give you some sense of what some of the key issues are that we'll be addressing here, and particularly address something that's gotten a lot of attention, which a proposal to think about making some changes to our rates. So it's important to understand the background to this. Background at Chelan PUD really is built on the history that we have here of long-term thinking. That it took a big effort by a lot of people here to develop resources, hydropower resources that have created a huge competitive rates advantage for us in this county. And the current PUD philosophy builds on that by thinking about the best value for the most people for the longest period of time. And that guides all of our decision making here at the PUD. And I would like to let you know as well that we are committed to having among the lowest rates in the country going forward and strong financial resiliency. So let me just summarize what I'll be telling you. Say that first of all, the PUD is in really good financial shape. We've had some terrific years, and we're using that financial strength to reduce our debt and to invest in our assets. There are, however, some potential storm clouds on the horizon, and this plan proposes to take modest rate actions now that protects against downside risks in the future. So let's get into some details here. First of all, I think many of you know that we have very low rates here in Chelan County, but let's just put some numbers to that. Our current rates are about 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour. The Washington state average is over 9.6, and the US average about 12.9. So take your bill and multiply times 3, and that's what you'd be paying on average in Washington state, and multiply times 4 for the average across the rest of the country. So that does give us a significant competitive advantage. How about the financial status of the PUD? We're really in very good shape. 2017, 2018 were our best years ever financially. We also are on track in 2019 for that to be a very good year, likely in the same range as 2017 and 2018. Our cash is at the highest level it's ever been. And our debt target, which we set in the last strategic plan, has been achieved, which was a 35% debt to equity ratio, which puts us in the top tier for any consumer-owned utility in our class. Our debt has been reduced more than $500 million, $500 million since 2010. And that's a big place on where the money has been going that we've been earning, is reducing the debt that we have. And since this is a consumer-owned utility, you can think of that as reducing the debt that all of us carry here in this county. The second place we've been investing the wealth that we've generated is in maintaining and upgrading our asset base. And of course, it's the incredible asset base here that we have that gives us this competitive rates advantage, particularly the hydro system. The 2015 strategic plan identified asset investment as a key priority for us. The 2020 to 24 plan continues that. And what has happened is we've done a lot of work to understand the state of our assets in the last 4 years. And now we are beginning to invest to be able to enhance those assets, because we found that there's a fair amount of work that needs to be done. Both our hydro system, in terms of its capability, and the reliability of our distribution system are roughly in second quartile performance nationally. And we believe with the resources that we have that these should be first quartile assets. I do want to assure you that all PUD assets and investments are analyzed to ensure that they create the best value for the long term, assuring that in fact that they are cost effective compared against alternatives. And that includes even things like facilities, like the new building that we're talking about putting together to consolidate all of our campuses across the county, as well as we are focused now on customer service technology, because a lot of you, we are discovering, want to be able to work with us on your phones or in other ways that will allow us to be able to meet your needs and meet you in the place where you like to do business. The investment in assets is resulting in an increase in expenditures, and that shouldn't be a surprise. So we know that, again, we have aging assets. They require a lot of work. The total asset base here will see an investment increase that will nearly double over the course of the next planning period. And just to put this in context, let's use our hydro system as an example. We know the hydro system is the core value that creates low rates here in Chelan County. From 2010 to 2015, we spent less than $20 million a year on our hydro system. For 2016 to 2024, we're planning to spend over 3 times as much, over $60 million a year, to be able to make investments that will assure that we are maintaining that long-term value of the hydro system, that we will be able to generate value for Chelan County residents long into the future. So what we've been able to do is take advantage of the fact that terrific investments were made here by our predecessors, and we want to leave the system in a place where it will continue to create competitive advantage for this county. The reason that we are doing so well is primarily due to the fact that we have substantial amounts of surplus electricity that we're able to sell other places at a rate higher than what we sell it for here. Only about 20% of our power is sold here in Chelan County, and a rate of about 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour is just over half the cost of actually providing that electric service. So again, it probably costs us nearly double that amount to provide that electric service, but we're using our revenue from wholesale sales from other places to in effect subsidize electric service here. Where does that money come from? 80% of our sales are at wholesale. About 50% of our total sales come from our long-term contracts to Alcoa and Puget, and both of those are at rates higher than our retail rate. And then about 30% goes into the market and is sold at market-based rates. Recently, a contract that we signed with Microsoft to serve their campus over on the west side has generated a lot of attention here in the county, and just want to make sure that folks are clear, that is a sale that's made at a market-based rate, substantially higher than what we sell at here at the retail in Chelan County. Now the challenge with those wholesale sales is that they are based on the market, and the market does move, and so those future revenues are difficult to predict for us. This graph shows you historically where wholesale prices have been going back to 2001. Some of you may recall the West Coast energy crisis of 2001 that drove prices exceedingly high, and that was an unusual year. But you'll notice that the years between 2001 through 2010, that prices were substantially higher than what we've experienced in the last 10 years. And we've seen a lot of wind and solar resources coming into the Western power markets where we sell, and they have tended to drive down prices. And that has given us some concern about what future prices will be, how much revenue we'll be able to generate there, which again is used to subsidize our local rates. We've also noticed that there is in our tracking, the amount of subsidy that's provided to our retail customers in terms of total dollars relative to the margin that we make on our wholesale sales. So how much are we generating from the wholesale sales minus the cost of providing that service? And what we're seeing is that the subsidy for retail sales is growing. That shouldn't be a surprise. We have local loads that are growing, so we're pulling sales out of the wholesale market into the retail market. And at the same time, we do have cost increases while we have not been having rate increases. And our wholesale margins have been falling as wholesale price have come down. Now, this graph shows actuals through 2019 and then forecasts what the future will be. And I always say you have to take that with a grain of salt because we're not that good about forecasting the future. But we do have a concern about whether these lines may cross in the future. The PUD strategic plan is really built around financial resiliency. And that resiliency looks at a variety of different future scenarios for us. We have an expected value case, what we might call the most likely scenario. And then we look at variations around that, including high revenues. What if the market gets really good? Or low revenues? What if the market prices were to fall substantially? Of course, if it's a high revenue scenario, everything is good. We would make a fair amount of money in those years, and those are very good times for us and for you. In the expected scenario, we expect to pull down our liquidity as we're making investments to a point where in about 2022 we would re-enter the bond market. And let me just say, we would be borrowing at that point. That is traditionally what utilities do. What we are doing today, where we cash finance all of our capital investments, is a very unusual situation. But we have the opportunity to be able to continue that for a few more years, but then we move back into a more traditional mode of borrowing. I would not call that a significant problem. It's the low revenue scenario that worries us. What happens if wholesale prices are to fall substantially, and what we do in order to be able to manage that situation? If you compare the 2015 to 2019 strategic plan against the 2020 to 24 plan, you'll find that there's a lot of similarities. The 2015 and 19 plan focused first and foremost on reducing debt. And I mentioned earlier we've accomplished our goal there. It also said we should begin to invest in assets and make some modest investments in public power benefit programs. 2020 to 2024 program increases the emphasis on investing for the long term because we now understand better the state of our assets. And it continues to assume that we will reduce debt. That's our plan under the expected forecast. But it makes that less of a priority because we've already achieved our goal. And it continues to assume that we will invest modest amounts. We've been investing about $4 million a year in the Public Power Benefit Program. Those are how we plan to handle expected and higher revenue forecast case. But we know that we could have low revenues. And in that scenario, the 2015 to 19 plan basically said, we will just assume that we will have to raise rates a lot and very quickly if we face that. This plan seeks to address that concern and says we should build some funds reserved to improved rate stability, so they're set aside in a separate account, and at the same time prepare for retail subsidies possibly exceeding the wholesale margin someday, although we don't know when. Now, I would note that all of these strategies assume that we will continue to seek productivity gains and wholesale revenue increases. No matter what scenario we're operating in, we are constantly striving to be able to find ways to be able to reduce our costs and increase our revenues. As part of our outreach on the strategic plan, we looked at the question of, so what happens if things go bad and what kinds of options would people like us to pursue? And one of the things that we heard very clearly was, if there is a risk of, in fact, rates having to go up, we would prefer that came in a staged rather than a very wholesale change rate. So we looked at and asked folks, if you have to choose between 3% or rate of inflation type rate increases over the next few years versus the risk of possibly hitting 10% rate increases, which would you prefer? And 3/4 of our customers said, we would prefer that you did this in a staged way, in a planned way, and avoid double-digit type rate increases. So let's just talk for a second about what it would mean to have rate of inflation type rate increases around here. Our current rates, as we noted earlier, about 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour. That would increase to 3.7 cents, as you saw from the earlier graph, still substantially below the 9.7 cent statewide average. And that would occur even at the end of the 5-year period by around 2024. 3% annually translates for an average monthly bill around here, which is about $55 a month, would add about $9 a month, move to about $64 a month in 2024. Let's put that in context in terms against what the statewide average would be. Today, if you're a Chelan PUD customer, you're saving about $1,350. Yes, that's right, $1,350 compared against if you were buying the same amount of electricity at the statewide average rate. In 2024, because we would anticipate that other utilities rates will be increasing as well, that differential, the benefit that you get by being a Chelan PUD customer, would increase to $1,450, even assuming that we were putting in place rate of inflation type rate increases. One of the things that we've heard from customers through time has been a concern about a threat to local control. We've heard this in the last strategic plan, we heard it in this strategic plan. Those folks would say, we're worried that the differential between our rates and others will cause others to have what would be called political envy, shall we say, that the value that we've got is too much and others should come in and be able to capture some of that. Currently, the statewide average rate is about 9.7 cents in 2017. It was 8.5 cents when we put the last strategic plan together. So it's increased substantially. And of course, we haven't had rate increases for 8 years here, so the Chelan rates have stayed at 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour. Back in 2014, the Wenatchee World included editorial comment that said it may well be in the best interest of the utility to consider modest, incremental rate increases over time, coupled with strategic investments to prove the wisdom of our stewardship of this resource. We face the similar types of concerns today. So let me wrap this up and just say the PUD is financially healthy. We're in very good shape. The rate increases that are proposed in this strategic plan are not because there is an immediate need, but rather because they are prudent from a long-term planning perspective. And we heard that a lot from our customers during the planning process. Inflation level rate increases allow us to provide greater predictability, particularly in low revenue forecast scenarios. And they begin to address the potential looming retail subsidy versus wholesale margin issue that I described earlier. And of course, it also protects against the threat to local control. With that, that's what I really wanted to share with you today. I want to thank our customers. They've done a tremendous job. We've had incredible engagement from customers throughout this strategic planning process. We've heard a lot from them. We encourage you to stay engaged with us, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for your time today.